think for creatives, it can be a really difficult tension to create something that is worship and then feel like, how do I put a price on something like this? And should I?
You're listening to the Faith and Work Podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities.
Welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast. My name is Ross Chapman. I'm serving as your host today, and I have the pleasure of having a co-host, Brian Gray, who is our VP of Formation, and I get to serve as the CEO at Denver Institute. We're so glad that you've joined us again on the Faith and Work Podcast. We are continuing our series called Voices from the Workplace, and this week we're excited because it's actually the second episode focusing on the arts or media, people who are working in the space of creativity and bringing that to the world as their everyday work. We have some amazing guests today. Brian, would you tell us about the special guests we have today?
Quick introduction to them. They're long-term friends of ours here around Denver Institute. We've been huge fans of their work in the arts. Jake's a professional artist and is certified as one of 9 master penmen in the world and holds the title of the youngest master penman by 3 decades to ever attain that title. A master penman does work in calligraphy and fine handwriting work. We'll ask Jake a bit about that. He's self-taught in the disciplines of calligraphy and painting, drawing, woodworking, engraving. And while he typically works with private clients, Jake's also worked with larger companies. A couple of the ways people have maybe gotten to know him is through his book, Old Soul, New Creation, which just documents a little bit about the artistic journey for his past. Hannah is the co-founder of Everyday Heirloom. We're going to ask her about it in just a bit, but it's a brand dedicated to adorning women as God's beloved through really creative custom jewelry pieces. And she also has been the business brains behind their shared company, has worked entrepreneurially while raising 4 kids, one of whom may be joining us here today on the podcast. So Jake and Hannah are wonderful. They're incredibly thoughtful. And together they've also hosted the Made to Last podcast, where they have some insights both about marriage and about the nature of slow art. Definitely worth checking it out.
Jake and Hannah, welcome to the Faith and Work Podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, it's so good to be here.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you guys on. And just want to start off with a question about, how does being an artist actually help you think about creativity and faith, maybe some aspect of God's character that maybe is more like obvious because you work in this particular space? What has your profession, your work actually taught you about God that maybe other professions don't as much, or just something that sticks out to you that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think being an artist has taught me to lean into the creativity of God. And in that way, art is my first form of worship. It's my first language that I engage with the Spirit of God and be able to communicate with Him on a daily basis. And I feel very blessed in that way to be a professional artist. And in so doing, it makes it very easy to fall into that relationship, to walk with God on a daily basis as I create with Him, always seeking to imitate God as the creator.
That's awesome. Hannah, what would you add to that? What's maybe something you've learned about God from your work?
Yeah, Jake speaks to it so well. I think the thing, though, is something we always say about our work is we feel very much discipled by our work privately before we're ever given permission to share it publicly. And so something that like putting our hands to like tangible embodied work, I think is, especially in a digital age and the culture that we live in, we just notice more people want tangible and slowness. And so I think imitating God in that way and creating, and it is very much a human experience, has been something that I think the arts do extraordinarily well. And so I think this idea of, putting our hands to something in a way that is tangible and it is embodied has definitely brought a closeness, both in my personal relationship with Christ, but also has brought us closer together as we work together on that same journey.
Mm-hmm.
I love that phrase, being discipled by your work. I know Ross and I probably just both lit up on that. So we asked that just to help people to connect a little bit with the working journey of artists, because probably most folks, even though all people are artistic and creative, most aren't working in the arts who are listening. But I want to hear a little bit about specifically your journey into these professions. So let's start, Jake. I'm guessing for you, when you were a kid and you were asked the question, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? You probably didn't pipe off master penman as your answer. So I'm just curious
No?
if you can give us kind of the work journey, talk us through how you became aware of these skills and gifts in your life and what brought you to your work today.
Yeah. Actually, I open up my book, Old Soul, New Creation, with a bit of a confession in that way that, while art was always like my favorite pastime, my oldest friend, it, in so many ways, I denied the calling that God had on my life. And so, just as C.S. Lewis is called the most reluctant convert, you could call me the most reluctant creative, because it was just something that I never thought I would do for the rest of my life. I didn't think it was, a viable form of an income. And even as a kid, I wanted to, like, when I was really young, I wanted to be a cowboy. So I drew pictures of horses obsessively. After that, I kind of went into this phase where I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and become a pilot in the Air Force. So I would draw fleets of airplanes. And then even when I, got into college, I wanted to be a psychologist working with kids and do art therapy. And so, here it was kind of that main thing that was always overlooked, that I always thought was going to be sort of the side salad to the main dish of life, that God was going to have for me. But I didn't realize that it was a feast unto itself. And, that there was plenty there for God to work with, because I think we fall into this kind of trap that we have to make ourselves useful before we can be used by God. And what I've found through my calling as an artist is that he used what was immediately at hand. And we see him do this time and again throughout scripture. He used David's sling to slay a giant. He used Moses' staff as a shepherd to lead his people out of captivity. And so it was just something that I overlooked or discredited, and was nothing that I ever imagined, even though growing up doing art and loving handwriting was always there. And then certainly master penman was a term I didn't even know until I was in college. And I discovered this very rare, title that comes from antiquity, rooted in the disciplines of old scribes that I never saw coming. But still, like, once I heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. But as a side, I'll just keep it on as a side. It'll always be a hobby for me. But, little did I know God had much bigger plans for it. And so I still did pursue my degree in psychology while I was getting my certificate as a master penman. But then that sort of like sideways branch, that bunny trail, became the main road that God had me on.
Thanks for sharing the background. Hannah, I've interacted with you most through some of Jake's work. You've been the business and the entrepreneurial side of that, but also Everyday Heirloom. Tell us a little bit in your own words about that project and give us the quick founding story. Why was it important to you and what do you love about it?
Yeah. Gosh, I say that affectionately now, Everyday Heirloom was the business I never wanted, but God knew I needed. And so it really wasn't something that I woke up and was like, man, I just really want another business, because I was doing everything and anything on the business side just to keep Jake painting, sculpting, whatever it was he was doing. My job was just maintain the business side of it. And it was really more or less Jake he came to me and he was like, gosh, as your husband, like, it is my spiritual duty to shepherd you well. Like, and I feel like you have gifts that you're not using. And so he's like, it would fall on me before the Lord, like that, you have gifts that aren't being used. And I want you to use those to the glory of the Lord. And so he's like, you have a writing background. You are an artist. I think the question I got early on was like, man, you're married to Jake. He's a professional artist. He's mind blowing. What do you do? And it was always kind of like, I was very, very happy to say, like, I do everything and anything just to keep him being Jake. And Jake was like, I want to share the stage with you in this way, because I can't do my work without you. So Everyday Heirloom, actually, it started off as like a kind of a curated home goods thing that I was like, oh gosh, I do not want to do this. And I just did it really reluctantly. And we had a few like necklace designs that just kind of, were things that I had asked Jake privately to make for me. And when I listed them back in the day on our Etsy site, which, just says so much about our beginnings, but it was the only thing that sold. And it was one of those things where I was like, what did we just crack into? And so we were taking Jake's like calligraphic skill, translating it into hand engraving and customizing hundreds and thousands of these pieces for women all over the world. And they were names, dates, phrases on rings, necklaces, bracelets, you name it. And so it was kind of this like very graceful transition to use like works that were hanging on the walls to now like hanging over the necks of women's and, being adorned by it. But I got to a point where I was like, there has to be more to this story. Like, because it ended up being more full-time work than Jake and I ever anticipated, which it was beautiful and it was a good problem to have. But entrepreneurially, you're like, okay, this is not sustainable. Like, and also I'm not like huge into jewelry. So I was like, God, what do you have for this? Like, what really do you want from this? Because my passion for it really wasn't there, if I'm honest. So I felt like I was just really leaning on Jake and I was leaning heavily on the Lord. So I had a moment where I just my face to the floor and ear to the door of God's heart. And I was like, what do you want from this? Because obviously you brought it. And I'm realizing how rare it is now, looking back, how successful it was in such a short amount of time. And I think that was God's grace and kindness to show us, like, this is what I have for you. Because I think otherwise I would have really doubted, is this where our time is best spent? Especially as we were growing a family alongside it. I was pregnant with our son, Henry. He was our one and only boy. Now we have 4 children. So I needed it to be plainly obvious this is what we were supposed to do. So long story short, we started creating like sculptural pieces using Jake's skill there, designing pieces together based on spiritual, scriptural messages. So and the phrase that the Lord really shared with me in that moment where I said, what do you want from this? And just surrendering it to him, he said, I want you to adorn my beloved with the inherent truth and beauty of the gospel. And it just was so clear. And so from that moment forward, I was like, we're going to adorn women from this idea of Revelation 2:21 and this idea of like, the church as the bride adorned for her husband. And so more or less, that's like the inspirational foundational verse for Everyday Heirloom. But a lot of people look at like the Everyday Heirloom side, and they look at Jake's work, and it is this beautiful addition and complement to our work together, but also what Jake's been doing in the fine art world for over a decade. And a lot of people look at it and say, oh, there's like the masculine side, and then there's more the feminine side, but they both work beautifully together. And it's really strengthened a lot of how we work together. And just a blessing that I never would have known to ask for in that way.
Yeah, because it gave us opportunity to speak into, I never would have been able to launch a women's jewelry line on my own. I guess I could have tried, but there was just much better opportunity for Hannah to speak at that level. And so it really collectively it broadened our voice, because it gave opportunity for Hannah to really, who has like such a heart for women and such an understanding as a wife, as a mother, as a follower of Jesus, like what are those things that God is impressing on her heart that we can crystallize in beautiful jewelry pieces and paired with her message. It was definitely like a sideways path from where we were headed with the main, art pieces that I was doing, going larger and larger. And here, now with Everyday Heirloom, I was working on quite literally the microscopic level. But to speak to people in this powerful way through Hannah's work and through her heart for women. And it was just, it's turned out to be such a beautiful and unique thing that we've done together.
Yeah, you guys have really articulated the way God's going to lead you into the work. I'm curious if you would add anything about where you have found his presence, maybe not his blessing and leading as much, but just where have you, going back to Hannah's phrase, discipled by your work. Where have you really found him in the middle of the process, or the day-to-day choices, the responsibilities, and the things that have come along with where the work has led you? Like, where do you really see his presence?
Oh gosh. I think
Let me count the ways.
yeah, exactly. I mean, his fingerprints are all over the nature of our work, the way that we work together. I am a multidisciplinarian artist, and so I can do many different things, but I can only do them one at a time. Whereas, when I look at the masterful work of God, he is like the ultimate and only true multitasker who's able to, take the little that we are able to do and then multiply it in the way that it grows our business and it deepens our faith and grows our marriage and even disciples our children in the way of the Lord, who are, always the ones, they're the canaries in the coal mine as we are constantly working away. But to see how their little hearts have grown and cultivated as we posture in our marriage and in our walk and in our business, the work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts.
And I think too, I mean, when you're an artist, like, I think culturally people are like, oh, but what's your real job? Like a lot of people, we were joking before we got on air, like, Brian, you're like, Pastor Penman, that's probably not real. We get it all the time. And it's just one of those things where we laugh at, because you're like, you're right. Like, culturally, it just doesn't, we don't see a lot of success stories in the arts, and Jake will say, in his book, but oftentimes in person, it's, he's like, I feel like art chose me long before I ever chose it. But there is a very real, like, when we talk about God's presence in our everyday lives, we are operating so much on God's manna. Like, that we're not very different from the Israelites, in the wilderness. We're like, we feel like that's our own wilderness in a lot of ways. Like, God, there is no success story that we are walking the path of faithfulness. It's like we have to pave it for others to maybe walk in it with more faith than even what we have, or maybe more easily than we have. But, asking God, like, I need you to be here in this and make this make sense, because right now it doesn't. Like, there's just a lot of work that we do that, monetarily or financially, like, this doesn't quite add up, that there's, God multiplying our loaves and fish. Like, here is our small offering, and Lord, would you make it multiply for your glory, and let us be good stewards of it. But I feel like we're often like feasting on breadcrumbs of God's faithfulness, because that's, I mean, you talk about feast and famine in the art world. It's like, that is a very real thing for us, but God's presence truly does sustain the work. And we would not be here if God didn't constantly invite us into such a grand adventure that oftentimes we're like, why are we here? What are we doing? Do we feel responsible adults raising 4 children?
Totally.
I love that.
Hi, my name is Parker Nabnett. As a financial advisor with I Am Financial, I am enriched by Denver Institute's programming and content, including this podcast. I love Denver Institute's mission to prepare people to serve God and others in their daily work so that workplaces and cities are transformed. I know my monthly donation gives the organization I love reliable support. Plus, I get great benefits like free or reduced admission to events and access to digital content. To become a monthly partner, please visit the Give page at denverinstitute.org.
I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the craft, the skill set behind what you're both doing. We'll maybe start with Jake. I'm thinking about Malcolm Gladwell's now debated statement of it takes 10,000 hours to develop expertise in something. My guess is you're already 4x that in your career, probably. You're probably up 40,000 hours into what you're doing or more. If you could talk to us a little bit about how the actual skill of your art has developed, whether that would be in calligraphy or in the fine art work that you do or in sculpting. Maybe just talk to us about how those disciplines have grown, how you've experienced failure or setback, or kind of any breakthrough rhythms along the way.
Yeah. No, I think there's craft undergirds so much of what I do. In all of the different art forms that I practice, I'm always looking back into the annals of history and rehearsing the strokes of past masters. And that's what gives me a common language for my art. In a lot of ways, I think that, craft is like the liturgical practice of my art. It gives me a common language to use and utilize so that when I do speak, I'm speaking with a common language that's been spoken for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That so much of what I do in creating meaning through my work is upholding sacred symbols. And so if I don't have an understanding of what that symbolism is and what it points to, then I'm just a clanging gong, a resounding cymbal. And that's what unfortunately, a lot of postmodernist art is about. It's about creating as you feel. It's not following any sort of precedent laid down by previous generations, and it points back at itself. And C.S. Lewis, he made this great statement years ago that he said, art, for art's sake, essentially neuters itself of its greatest power, which lies in its ability to ever point to something higher than itself. And so that, for me, like craft is a good way that keeps me on track for the artistic expression that I'm breathing through it. Craft is critically important. And every single one of the art forms that I do requires a great deal of practice, of preparation in order to really master it. The master penman of old said, you don't practice until you get it right. You practice until you can't get it wrong. That it's so innate in what you do that when the moment calls for you to execute that letter or that word on the page, you can do so without hesitation. It might take 40 seconds to create that letter, but it might be 40 years of practice before you get to the 40 seconds.
Yeah, that's a lot like the emails I write every day in my job. 40 seconds per keystroke. So, real super similar to your craft there when I'm counting out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Apples to apples.
Well, yeah, while Brian draws a huge contrast, I just am profoundly challenged about like what kind of care it might require if every kind of person decided like this thing that I do every day is my worship. It's this thing that's discipling me. And I think we talk a lot about, I think Tim Keller and Catherine Leary Alstorf call it the ministry of competence. And I love that phrase because it's just a challenge to actually do the work for the sake of doing the work well. And you guys are demonstrating that with the way that you're approaching your art and your craft. And I just wonder, like, what if we created spreadsheets in our day-to-day jobs like that, and emails and whatever the products and services are we're offering to the world, like, do we put that kind of care into it, and intentionality and thoughtfulness? And so I'm just really encouraged by that. That's awesome. Yeah. So thanks for doing the slow work. It's obviously shaping you and it's creating something really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely born of a different era. You think of like, we say that we are building cathedrals in a pop tent world. It's like we live in a day and age where everything is next day and
Amazon Prime
and and instant gratification and disposability, not focused on the things that last. And so it feels very much different, very much out of time, anachronistic in a way to live with this level of slowness and intentionality, but it's critically important to the work that we do and the truth that we carry. Because if the truth is going to last on, if it is going to be a lasting truth, then it should be done in a lasting way. And so, one of the greatest art critics of the 19th century was John Ruskin, and he said, well, we need to always consider the things that we invest in, and will they save by keeping? One thing is most assuredly true, is that which is made quickly will perish quickly. So essentially, take your time, because that time invested results in the time and the endurance of that thing that you create.
That's really good. Well, just a quick contrast then, Hannah, you're like running this site that's selling products and you said thousands, maybe even. How does that relate to the slowness of craft that Jake's talking about? Because I imagine it's not exactly the same when you start thinking about it from an entrepreneurial business side of things.
Yeah, I mean, it is and it isn't, right? Because you're honoring the story of slowness. But at the same time, being present in the marketplace. The marketplace needs this story of slow art because we've forgotten it. And we're finding more and more like hopefulness in upcoming generations, but they lack a legacy mindset. So it's like if we're going to meet them, we need to meet them where they are. And so it's like it takes the technology to do that. And we there's a reason why I do it and Jake doesn't. He doesn't love social media. He doesn't, we often joke it's like tongue in cheek, but there's a little bit of truth in it. Is I'm like, Jake, I have to keep you pure, so he's not on social media. He vets everything that I share. But I'm managing all of that for him to keep his mind in a place where it's like, this is my worship. It's not for the applause of man and the people pleasing. And so you can just easily get into that on the social media and he doesn't need to be managing the website, but all these digital means are really truly just to point to the story of what God is doing in our lives and doing it in a way that's generous. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people aren't talking about, the generosity of time maybe spent in those digital spaces to actually invite you into something that is lasting and something that is happening in real time. And so for me, the running the business side is, in the same direction that Jake's running. And it is at the same pace, ironically enough. I know it doesn't seem like that, but there is very much the having to keep pace with one another and the Lord and doing it for such a time as this. We live in a digital age. Jake says that he drives a horseless carriage just like everybody else, but this kind of knock on digital stuff because he's, everything he does is analog. But yeah, my job is to share it in a way that gets in the hands and hearts of people.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I'd like to maybe apply these kind of ideas to maybe a couple specific pieces. So I've just confessed to being a big fan, and for a long time, Jake, of your work. In fact, I saved up like small amounts of my little hobby fund to pick up my first piece, which is C.S. Lewis imagining Aslan in the smoke of his pipe. Like I just totally in love with it. And then our former CEO knew that I was saving up for it and loved it and got it for me as a gift. So,
how cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's just hanging in my favor. I really love it. Let me ask a quick question about that, then we'll talk about the process another one. So one of the things that I love in this image, and we'll link to a digital version of it, is that you've mentioned Lewis a couple of times, so I bring it up. So as Lewis is smoking his pipe, he's in the smoke that's billowing from the bowl of his pipe is this image of Aslan. To me, it kind of communicates a little bit of the life of his imagination, his kind of creative world. I'd just be curious, two things. If you could what was the personal meeting that linked kind of Lewis in particular, who you've been a fan of, to that work? And then I'd love for you to tell us about Lewis's hand.
Oh, sure. Lewis for me he's a creative hero of mine. I mean, just in the way that he was so imaginative. He was such a profound communicator. Here he could take, he could argue in the most complex sense about philosophy and theology, but then distill it down in the simplest, most beautiful terms. And I think that shows a real mastery over your skill. In fact, he says that in his book on writing, which is a compilation of his different advice that he gave to writers on writing. He says, if you cannot explain your thoughts simply, then you don't understand them. And so he was just really amazing that way. I loved his thought process. So of course I wanted to do a portrait of C.S. Lewis and, have him smoking a pipe. And I was able to find this great portrait of him just sitting there, and he has this great, grin on his face, but he wasn't smoking a pipe. But I found a reference photo of his pipe that's in his museum. And this is one, it was said that when C.S. Lewis was like, he would always be smoking a pipe when he was writing something, and he had a jacket, a smoking jacket, where he had to replace the pocket on it several times because he would have this profound thought in the middle of smoking a pipe, and he'd put the pipe in his pocket and it would light his pocket on fire. And so he had to have the pocket replaced several times. And I love that story. I love the color of it. And the thought of him in the midst of, having a good smoke, that he had these beautiful, like, revelatory moments. And so I wanted to compose, this imaginative piece of him smoking his pipe. So it's a portrait of him and using, the power of rendering, kind of like old world Photoshop wise. I was able to put the pipe in his mouth, and I couldn't quite find a great picture of his hand holding the pipe. So I referenced my own. I had the same pipe and I referenced my own hand. I made it a little bit chubbier, a little bit more
You
aged.
Yeah.
Yep, I aged it and kind of matched it to the age of the man. And so that's kind of this cool Easter egg is, the hand that drew the piece is actually in the piece as well. But then out of the smoke of the pipe rises this lion. And so it's C.S. Lewis coming face to face with one of his most beloved characters in literature of Aslan. So it's a really fun piece. It's one of our favorites. Unfortunately, we hung it on our wall in prime of place in our home for years. And we did sell the original, and it was really
unfortunate.
Yes, it was hard to let go of that one, but it is definitely one of my most popular and beloved pieces that I've made.
Well, I've gotten more comments on that than any other, probably because of where it sits in my home. And it's fun to tell the Easter egg story, and that it's a gift from a dear friend. But I want to ask about another piece, and maybe you could talk us from idea to concept all the way through. This is the business side where this is kind of up and Hannah's working on selling it. I'd love to ask about, I also own this piece because it's stunning to me. It's Suffering Servant in a Single Stroke. As a very fast description for context, again, we'll link to a copy of the image. It basically is a single pen stroke that begins from, is it right the tip of his nose?
Yeah, it's a portrait of Jesus in one continuous line. And it starts as a very tight, the whole thing is a very tight spiral that starts in the center of his nose. It goes around itself 175 times. And as it does, it contours the face of Christ, almost like topographical lines on a map. But the line also gets thinner and thicker to create shadow and highlight. And then in the end, evens out to a perfect oval to frame in the face of the suffering servant. It was a very difficult piece to do. I did it years ago. It's, as you're doing it, you're thinking of shading the piece, you're moving in a spiral. You're not only worried about like the variation of the line which is dictated by the pressure that you put down on the pen, but also the ratio of light to dark between those lines as you're passing around in that spiral fashion. It's kind of like humming 3 songs at once. It was definitely a mentally exhausting piece to do. That demands all of your focus all the time.
Well, I don't want to use a phrase that's become trite, but I think it has to be seen to be believed. Like it is truly, particularly as the piece comes out and you move into the eyes of Christ, there's this life and vitality. I'm like, this is a single stroke. It's got to be about line or circle about 140 by the time we get to that. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the link of this. It is really, really beautiful. I'd be curious though. So this is, Hannah, you mentioned that this had been one of the more popular, let's say commercially popular pieces. So here's this incredibly arduous, difficult, challenging humming of 3 songs at one time type of piece. And then it's become commercially successful. Can you just tell us a little bit about the process of how this kind of beauty and creativity comes into the life of the entrepreneurial side of your business so that someone like me can own it or own a copy of it?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, we talk about moving from sacred into the marketplace a lot because I think for creatives, it can be a really difficult tension to create something that is worship and then feel like, how do I put a price on something like this? And should I? I mean, I think right now, not to be like controversial, but Forrest Frank, for instance, was like, how do I put out worship albums and make money on this? Like, there's a lot of people who would argue that this is like, what I should be doing. And, I think that's an internal struggle. I know you didn't ask about that, but it's like, it is a very real thing, especially when you're dealing with matters of like portraits of Christ, and you're like, and the end result, it's worth a conversation, maybe longer than what we have, but the logistical side of it is like, how do we capture the story beautifully in a way that really puts paint to, the real life interaction that Jake had without sparing, the intimate details that feels personal for someone else. Like, it's amazing that it has the impact that it does have on other people the same way that it did for Jake. And that's why to go back to that phrase, like, we're very much discipled by our work privately, is a huge part of the integrity kept with each art piece that is shared publicly. And for us, we cannot divorce the message from the piece. It'd be one thing to put the piece out but have no story attached to it. No one would know. The impact wouldn't be there. So for me, like, making sure that the story is told in a way that's authentic and true to the way in which it was made with excellence is like just our conviction. And doing that, with an entrepreneurial spirit of like, I want people to know Jake's heart, and I want people to see the artwork that he creates. And a lot of it is because, we joke about this, but it's like, we need diapers. You hear our 6-month-old in the background, and it's a very practical thing, and so raising 4 kids, you get really serious about, your work that, what's the phrase that Jake uses? I always feel like I quote Jake a lot. Like, he quotes C.S. Lewis, and I'm like, I quote you actually. But he goes, when you like love what you do, what you love has to make you a living, and that's a very real thing for us. And so, again, I know you asked more like the practical, like maybe logistical side of what it looks like to like put these pieces out into the world. I feel like it's my responsibility to really tell that story well so that other people understand the craft, but again, understand Jake's heart, but also like the heart of the Father is like, that is why we do what we do. It's what keeps us here. I cannot tell you how many times we have looked at each other and said like, is this what God has for us? And if it is, he will show us, because it's, I don't want people to think they look at our life and go, oh my gosh, they must have cracked the code on something. Like, they're figuring it out. And you're like, you know what? It's actually really difficult. There's no plan B. Like, Jake did not go to school thinking he was going to be an artist. And, my background is in writing, but this was not something in the cards that we thought, oh yeah, we're going to be professional artists, and here's the path how to get there. Like, I think there's so many questions that even we are still walking through. Like, what do you have for us, Lord? Because there is no path like that we've ever seen before that fits what we're called to. So the faithfulness and the true faith that it takes to do what we do on a daily basis and put things out there for the world. I mean, I don't have like a really clean cut, here's how we do it, and we know exactly how it looks every day. It feels like it changes season to season, but yeah.
Well, it's working. Truly the storytelling behind that piece, Hannah, because you mentioned storytelling. I might be older than y'all. I don't know if you remember, there was an old show on VH1, which was a competitor to MTV, and it was called Behind the Music. And they would have artists like play a song where they talk about the song. And so you could hear Clapton play a song and then describe it. Well, the song gets so much better. And I feel like the stories that you produced had that effect. So I've sent out a video story of that to people. It's like, oh, you think looking at it's good. Now like get behind the scenes of it. And it's just, so I think that the combination of those is a really beautiful way that it brings life even out of the page, even off of this two-dimensional image. It's really invigorates the experience for the person who appreciates it. So I love it.
I also just really enjoy what you guys are talking about in terms of like, do you take this thing that's discipled you and share it with the world, and somehow you have to make money off of that to keep doing it? And I think what you're doing is trying to cast a new vision for economics. And I would just say it's actually an exchange of something that you want to offer to the world. God gives out of his love and out of his abundance. It feels like that to me. And it's just a reality that we have ways to get it out in the world that allow us to also sustain our own lives. And, we have a conference called Business for the Common Good. So business, being purposeful for the life of the world, as Jesus would say in John 6. How can our everyday work actually be for the life of the world? And I think when you guys approach the way that you guys are approaching it is, this has formed us. This is a worshipful thing. Wouldn't it be great if we could all have everyday work, live in that mentality of this is our worship? We get a chance to offer it to others. It's actually, we're kind of extending mercy to one another in a way, and the value is created in that exchange. And I think that's a beautiful way to do it. Surely it doesn't work out that way every time, because it always takes two people to make an exchange. But for Brian, being able to put this piece of art in his home and like what that means to him, like you've actually extended something beautiful to him, and he's been able, through a friend, to be able to extend something you guys need and want. So that's cool. Okay, so you guys are working together in the business. You're married, you have 4 kids. Like you could probably write a whole book about what's been really good and what's been really hard and how you work through it. But just give us one little nugget of wisdom for people who maybe are working together and are married, or maybe they're working with a close friend. What's something that you've learned that's been really helpful in that journey?
I think we've found that there are definite challenges to working together, and that, that sort of enmeshes your life on the next level. But there are other ways in which that becomes a very favorable thing, that when you lean into it, like we've even found that, business in a way is almost like a great accountability for our marriage. Because it's like, if there is conflict between us, it's like there is reason that we have to get it resolved, and resolved quickly and efficiently, because it's like that can't go on. We're holding up business as well.
Without shoving it under the rug.
Right. And so it's like, whereas like other people might be like, well, whatever, I'm going to go my separate way, bury myself into work. It's like, we don't have that, we meet ourselves in the midst of work. And so in that way, it's like, we've learned how, just as it could be another point of conflict and is from time to time, it's an opportunity to grow in that relationship and use it in our favor for the good of our marriage, for the good of like our family. And, that being said, it still takes like making sure that there are boundaries. It's like we try our best. We're not always like very good at it, but we try our best to like turn off business talk before our head hits the pillow.
But
like,
also we love it. So there's that aspect of like,
true.
Jake's dad used to like, challenge us in like a very like fatherly way, like go on a date and don't talk about business. And we're like, but we actually really love talking business stuff. And it is so integrated into everything we do that, to Jake's point, it is a great accountability. But there's also like a good reminder for us is like, we are complementary. We're not in competition. So knowing like we're better together, our work, has great checks and balances for our marriage. It's also not for the faint of heart. You're going to find things really, you run into each other's limitations really fast, and learning how to like, get through them in a real, like in a healthy way. Jake early on laid amazing boundaries and rules for our marriage that I think would be helpful for a lot of people to know. Like he took a psychology of marriage class, and I'm like, this should be just required for people who want to be married. Like, I mean, but you layer on business and, growing a family. And, I love this definition of integrity is the inside matches the outside and vice versa. For us, our conviction is like, we will not produce something, or we simply can't. The Lord really doesn't allow us to, because we don't get anything well produced out the door if we're not we're not getting along, or there's an issue in our marriage or something. Like our work is like multiplied so many times over that it's like the health of our marriage almost makes its way into our work itself. And so if we're not in an excellent place, the work isn't excellent, if that makes sense. And so it's making sure our offering is leading in a way that it is excellent and it is pure. And that's not to say like, oh yeah, we're perfect all the time, but it is a good accountability to make sure like, where are we at? Like, is this a good, are we on a good page? Or are we on the same page? So, but it is fun. We love it. And I honestly can't imagine doing it any other way.
Yeah.
So very rewarding.
Definitely clear that you guys cheer each other on, work complementarily, and resolve conflict well. So I'm sure people can go listen to your podcast and get some more ideas on all that, and maybe more. But just final word for our audience. We love to leave our guests with just the opportunity to just be an encouragement or offer a challenge. It could be specific to people doing similar work, or it could just be whoever's listening. So I'll let you guys leave us with a word of encouragement.
Well, coming from a couple of artists, I would say lean into your creativity in whatever way that you go to work, that you are made to be creative. You might not think of yourself as artistic, but that is entirely beside the point. You were made to be creative. And that is so much of the message of our lives. It's the message that is distilled down in my book, Old Soul, New Creation, is that you were made to be creative. And when you engage in that creative capacity, you are actually stepping into the imago Dei, the very image of God as he intended you to be. And he is going to join you in that work. It's not a matter of you inviting him into that work. He's already invited you into that work. And so through faithfulness, that's how we enter in. So to lean into that creativity and to let your work flourish, whatever it is that God has called you to do.
Thanks for that. That's awesome. Jake and Hannah, thanks so much for being on the Faith and Work podcast, and thanks for the way that you approach your work and have shared it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Well, we're happy to have introduced you or let you hear a little bit more of the story of Jake and Hannah. They're incredibly faithful. A couple things for listeners to know about that are upcoming around Denver Institute this fall. The 5280 Fellowship, we're currently taking applications for this early to mid-career professional development, theology for work, and spiritual formation program. And so you can learn more about that at 5280fellows.com or on our website. And applications are running on that through this fall, but at the end of October as a priority deadline. One of the fun things, Jake and Hannah we do occasional dinners or coffees or lunches with leaders around the city so we can do some show and tell style learning. And so we took a group of fellows in the past to have dinner with Jake and Hannah and hear about art and business. So that'll be an opportunity we'd love for you to look into. Ross, tell us a bit more about Women Work and Calling, November 7th.
If you're listening in Denver in the Front Range or across the country or maybe even around the world, I would love to encourage you to check out Women Work and Calling. November 7th, it's a Friday. Go to womenworkandcalling.com to learn more. There's still time to register, but spots are filling up quickly, so get yours today. Really an incredible event. It's the 10th annual one, so it's going to be awesome. Love to have you Friday, November 7th at Women Work and Calling. Thanks so much for listening to the Faith and Work podcast. We'll see you next time.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.